Thank you, Nick. We're sorry for the time constraint. We're going to talk now about transportation logistic, and which in Cuba is an awful situation. Transportation has been, the infrastructure, deteriorating rapidly. And in the seminar we have today the privilege of having with us Jack Rose, which I ask him to come. Oh, Jack. Jack is the Senior Marketing Program Manager at Ryder System. He holds a BS in Engineering Management from Nova Southeastern, a Master on Business Administration from Florida International, and is President of the Association of Cuban Engineers, and currently serves as a corporate advocate and board member for the Down Syndrome Association of Miami.
7 minutes, Elena? Really? 7 minutes. I guess first of all, I want to thank the Association of Cuban Engineers, la Asociación de Ingenieros Cubanos, por invitarme. I'm really Cuban. I just have an American name and an American dad, so we'll just deal with the fact that I was brought up with the guilt of going back to Cuba in a post-Castro regime, and I've lived with that guilt for the rest of my life. And I'm very proud to be here and represent the Cuban-American community. All right. So let's talk a little bit about transportation and logistics. So the analysis, let me kind of start with the performance index. What you're seeing here, this is a World Bank study in 2012 that basically ranked key indicators for customs, infrastructure, international shipment, competency, on-time delivery, and tracking. And Cuba, as of 2012, ranked 144 of 156, or the bottom 8% of the performance index across the world. That's a reflection on infrastructure. That's a reflection of a lack of control and process management. So this is kind of what you would expect to see. And the World Bank is just reinforcing the fact that the infrastructure, the logistics infrastructure in Cuba is not in a position to support the scale of almost $30 billion in capital improvement projects, which would be needed for Cuba. The next slide talks about managing scarcity. I had a lot of difficulties with this slide because it's 55, 60 years. Believe it or not, Cuba's very good at reverse logistics. They manage with scarcity. They've been doing that for the last 50 years. Irrespective of the mandates or lack of government-mandated recycling programs, they do with what they've got. There's a lack of intellectual capital, skilled labor, yet they somehow manage to maintain somewhat of a front for the travel industries in certain segments of their import and export markets, with the appearance that they've got an infrastructure in place, and as many of you know, we're talking about 50 years of no maintenance. The Panama Canal is an interesting project. The expansion is scheduled to be completed in 2014, and a lot of our freight is managed right now through the West Coast of the United States. The Port of Miami presents some opportunities to support a new basin if Cuba were in a position to manage and be in a position to be a freight forwarder or a port, if you will, for that basin. So the Port of Miami expansion project does lend itself to some opportunities both here in the United States and in Central and South America. They have a difficult infrastructure. The lack of adequately financed wholesale markets basically promotes illicit wholesale markets. So what basically happens is when you have no infrastructure in place, you have counterproductive infrastructure through illicit wholesale markets, i.e. contraband, that basically undermines the border reform process or the broader reform process. These three bullet points that I'm speaking of really make it difficult to understand how we would actually not just invest the capital, but manage the projects, provide oversight for the projects, and control spending. Next slide. Logistics needs, right? So when we talk about fleets, right, which is an area that I'm focusing on in this presentation. You have aging fleets, asset management issues. You have a fuel grid issue. You have driver training issues. You have political climate and culture. Just our aging fleets. I mean, the island is not very long, right? So when you're looking at the La Carretera Central and you're looking at the hubs of infrastructure for fueling, for maintenance facilities, the layout is pretty straightforward as to where you would put those facilities. The challenge here is that you've got no oversight on fuel, on waste disposal management. You've got no maintenance shops for SAM class light duty vehicles, which is predominantly day cabs, which is what you need for Cuba. You don't necessarily need sleepers or long haul vehicles. So the layout for day cabs and light duty is just the nature of the geographic makeup of the island. The challenge I see here is the intellectual capital and the lack of skilled labor to support the vehicles. Next slide. I have this clock in my head, like, okay, I got 3 minutes, I got 2 minutes. The railways. An interesting takeaway here, depending on the railway system, 8,000 to 15,000 kilometers. The majority of it is used for sugar as opposed to passenger. The lack of capital investments, there's no signs, signals, or crossings. Portions of the rail are no longer managed, and it's safety hazards, right? So if you look at highway and you mix highway with rail, both systems require a significant overhaul to their maintenance and operations. We estimate approximately anywhere from $7 to $9 billion in just roadway improvements based on current rate of inflation with the present value of dollar. This is an interesting slide. This is a cross-border infrastructure requirement. Currently, this is the example above is what we do with the Ryder organization between U.S. and Mexico for milk processing plants. So when you look at the hubs here in Havana and some of the other areas that I've identified, we're going to need some significant infrastructure. Excuse me a second. Let me pull the slide up here because I can't see that slide. So I think the layout or the math here is basically saying we probably want to promote hubs in Havana, Santa Clara, and Santiago de Cuba. That layout supports kind of some just-in-time delivery controls for our parts. We need pooled volumes through that just-in-time delivery at those three ports. The recommendation would be, comprehensive cross-border services, cross-docking operations, a consolidation and deconsolidation plan, a vendor management of inventory, centralized control towers, a network viabilities and controls and reporting. So the layout is been validated in other models, and other cross-border and other cross-country logistic models. It can work in Cuba. It's just the amount of capital investment is going to be the challenge and the oversight of that capital investment. Guidelines for supply chain infrastructure. 75, and I think this is a pretty interesting and telling statistic, the majority of the spend is tied to determining the network in place and not necessarily by the team that makes up the decisions on a daily basis. Cuba has a very limited network infrastructure. Whether it's 3PL, freight forwarding, cargo, they have a very limited infrastructure with limited intellectual capital and skilled labor. My challenge is here that with significant capital oversight, we're not going to see the capital improvement gains. My position is investors in the private sector will invest if there's a return on their capital. The challenge is, will that return on capital be easily managed through either the World Bank providing oversight on that capital, or through some third-party agency that is providing guidance and direction on the spend? I think that if there's guidance on the spend with the capital improvement projects, and there's anywhere from a 5 to 8 year return on investment, I think most major private marketers are going to jump into that space because they want greenfield. They want to be first to market. They want to establish their infrastructure and their distribution centers, and that's very attractive to a lot of private sector transportation firms. Next slide. So I think from an asset management perspective, aging fleets, used vehicles and parts are going to be a significant challenge. But again, it's capital investment. Fuel grid and fuel disposal and oversight on fuel disposal, I think, will be extremely important. Maintenance and service facilities, which we alluded to, which is to have the shops in the right locations, have a just-in-time model for shop and parts, and have them strategically located throughout the island to provide the services for those aging fleets. Primary and secondary roadways are a mess. Capital improvement would have to fundamentally lay out a redesign of their roadways, a resurfacing of their roadways, tolls, guardrails for their rail, and basically have a fundamental streamlined rail and roadway system to support basic primary transportation of goods and services. Port regulations and supplier protocols are going to be huge, but I think that'll just come with some form of regulation. You can't do one without the other. You can't do the spend, not have the oversight, and not have a regulatory agency managing the oversight, and not have this fear of political oversight on corruption driving decisions. Inbound and outbound freight management. It's nice for all of us to say we're 90 miles away, and because we've got the Port of Miami, that it affords us certain benefits and certain economies of scale to be able to manage freight out of Florida. I think the opportunity will be there, but I think like a lot of us, there's this perception of credit risk and the spend and how much are you willing, what's your tolerance level for managing and spending dollars in Cuba. The fourth piece there that I didn't really speak to is the culture. I think that 55 years of limited supplies and limited resources and limited infrastructure are not going to be addressed overnight. I mean, this is a multi-year, multi-decade project plan. And I think that obviously understanding ports, rail, air, and transportation are fundamentally one of the basic building blocks to rebuild Cuba. And I expect that if we're in a position, organizations here in the U.S., freight forwarders specifically, and 3PLs will make the investments and lay greenfield sites in Cuba with the expectation of getting a return on their logistic investments. Thank you very much.